No one told Daniel Harper the truth about Ashford House. They told him everything else. They told him it was built in 1873, commissioned by a physician of considerable wealth and questionable reputation. They told him the structure had survived wars, winters, and abandonment. They told him the price was low because people preferred newer constructions. They did not tell him why those people left. The first night, Daniel slept well. Too well. It was the kind of sleep that feels unnatural, heavy, dreamless, almost forced. As though the house itself had pressed a hand gently over his consciousness and whispered, "Rest, while you still can." He woke at exactly 2:17 a.m., not to a sound, but to silence. The silence was wrong. Old houses are never truly quiet. They breathe. They creak. They remember. But Ashford House had stopped. Even the wind outside seemed to hesitate against its walls. Then came the smell. Fresh coffee, dark, bitter, recently poured. Daniel sat upright, his heart reacting before his mind could reason. "I didn't make any—" His voice sounded small, swallowed by the thick air. He stepped into the hallway. The wooden floor beneath his feet was colder than it had been hours before. The corridor stretched ahead, dimly lit by moonlight slipping through tall windows. And at the very end, there it was. A door. One he had noticed before, but never questioned. Locked. Ordinary. Forgettable. Except now, beneath it, a thin line of golden light flickered. Soft. Breathing. Alive. Daniel's pulse slowed instead of quickening. That was the first mistake. Fear sharpens a man. Curiosity dulls him. He walked forward. One step. Then another. The smell of coffee grew stronger, richer, as though welcoming him closer. His fingers hovered over the doorknob. Cold. Not naturally cold, but the kind of cold that felt deliberate. Then, a voice. Thereafter saw, close, not from the hallway, but from the other side of the door. "You're early." Daniel froze. Every instinct told him to step back, to return to bed, to pretend this moment had never happened. But something deeper, older, more dangerous, held him there. From inside the room came another sound, slow, measured, unmistakable. Typing, as if someone had been waiting, not for a visitor, but for him specifically. And in that moment, though he did not yet understand it, Daniel Harper had already done the one thing no one had warned him about. He had listened. Before we go deeper, understand this. This story isn't for everyone. If you're still here, you're one of the few who can face what America buried. Subscribe now, and tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? And would you dare hear this story from your own backyard? Morning arrived like a lie. Sunlight spilled generously through the tall windows of Ashford House, coating its aged floors in warmth, softening its edges, disguising its intentions. In daylight the house seemed almost embarrassed by the memory of the night, as though it wished to convince Daniel that nothing had happened. And for a brief, fragile moment, he believed it. The hallway stood quiet. The locked door at its end appeared ordinary again. No light, no sound, no presence. Daniel approached it cautiously. He touched the handle. Cold, but no colder than old metal should be. "Just a dream," he muttered. But even as he said it, something in him resisted the comfort of that explanation. Dreams do not leave behind details. Dreams do not linger in the air like scent. He turned away. The house revealed itself slowly, like an old man choosing what to confess. In the study, hidden behind shelves of neglected books, Daniel found a journal. Leather-bound, cracked with age. Waiting. It did not belong to him. Yet when he touched it, A strange familiarity settled in his chest. The first page bore a name: Dr. Edmund Ashford, 1873. Daniel sat down. The chair creaked beneath him, as though disturbed by the act. The handwriting inside was precise. Too precise. Each letter carved with intention, as if the writer feared time itself might distort his meaning. Time is not experienced equally by all men. Daniel frowned slightly. Victorian philosophy, nothing unusual. He turned the page. Isolation alters perception. Silence expands it. But confinement, true confinement, breaks it entirely. A subtle chill crept along his spine. The next few entries were inconsistent. Dates skipped, repeated, contradicted themselves. One passage described a guest arriving at the house. Another, written earlier, described the same guest leaving. Older. Changed. Daniel leaned closer. The final chamber must remain sealed. It stabilizes the condition. Without it, the house does not remain aligned. Aligned? With what? A faint sound interrupted him. He looked up. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Then, from somewhere deep within the corridor, a slow, steady sound emerged. Not footsteps, not movement. Breathing. Daniel stood. The journal slipped slightly from his hands. He stepped into the hallway. The air felt heavier now. Denser. As if the house had exhaled something ancient into its walls. And at the far end, the locked door stood exactly as before. Still, silent, closed. But now, Daniel was certain of one thing. It was not empty. The house began to change after that morning. Not visibly, not in ways one could easily name, but in subtle, deliberate shifts, like a mind adjusting its thoughts around an intruder. Daniel tried to occupy himself. He cleaned the kitchen, rearranged furniture, opened windows to invite air into spaces that felt watched. Yet no matter where he stood, he remained aware of the hallway and the door. By afternoon, he convinced himself again. Old house, old noises, overactive imagination. By evening, he stopped believing it. It started with something small. A drawer. The second drawer from the left side of the kitchen counter. Daniel had opened it twice before. Empty. Completely empty. But now, it resisted. He frowned and pulled harder. The wood scraped softly, then opened. Inside lay a single object. A key. It was old. Not rusted, but aged with intention. Darkened metal. Heavy. Solid in a way modern things rarely are. Daniel stared at it for a long moment. A strange thought entered his mind. Not, where did this come from? But, why now? He reached in. The moment his fingers touched the key, something shifted. Not in the room. In him. A quiet, invasive certainty, as if something had just recognized him, accepted him. Daniel pulled his hand back quickly. His breath had grown uneven. No, he whispered. But the word lacked conviction. The house was silent again. Watching. Waiting. Night came slowly, reluctantly. Daniel did not turn on the lights. He didn't remember choosing not to. Instead, he sat in the dim glow of fading daylight, the key resting on the table before him. Time passed, or didn't. And then, without needing to check, he knew. 17 a.m. The smell arrived first, stronger than before. Fresh coffee, recently poured. Then, the hallway. A faint golden light stretched once more beneath the locked doors, or brighter now, steadier, inviting. Daniel stood. His movements felt distant, automatic, as though he were remembering actions he had already taken. The key was in his hand. He didn't remember picking it up. Step by step, he walked toward the door. The air grew warmer, the scent thicker, almost comforting. He reached the end of the hallway, stood before the door. The handle no longer looked cold. It looked expectant. Daniel lifted the key. For a brief moment, something inside him resisted. A final fragment of instinct. Don't. But that voice was small, distant, drowning beneath something far older. He inserted the key. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. The lock turned with a soft, decisive click. And in that moment, though Daniel did not yet understand it, he had not opened the door. The door had accepted him. Chapter 4. The Room That Was Still Alive. The door did not open all at once. It resisted, not like wood against pressure, but like something deciding. Then, slowly, with a long, tired creak, it gave way. Warm air spilled out, not stale, not abandoned, but fresh. Daniel stepped inside, and immediately knew. This room did not belong to the rest of the house. Everything here was alive. The air was warmer than the hallway. The scent of coffee lingered, rich, recent, undeniable. A soft golden light filled the space, though no visible source could fully explain it. The room was perfect. A bed stood neatly made, its sheets smooth, untouched by time. A wooden desk rested near the window, polished to a shine no dust had dared disturb. A chair slightly pulled back, as if someone had just stood up moments ago. Daniel's breath slowed, not from calm, but from confusion. "This isn't possible," he whispered. He moved forward. His footsteps made no sound. That was the second mistake. On the desk, a laptop. Modern, out of place, completely impossible in a house that seemed frozen in another century. Its screen glowed faintly, waiting. Daniel approached. Every instinct now screamed at him to leave, but instinct had already lost. On the screen, a sentence. Incomplete. "If you are reading this, then it has already—" The cursor blinked. Once, twice, then, without warning, it moved. Letters appeared. One by one, begun. Daniel staggered back. "No." His voice cracked. The screen flickered again. New words formed, slower this time, deliberate. "You should not have entered." The air shifted. The warmth began to fade. The golden light dimmed, and for the first time, the room felt aware. Daniel turned, instinctively, desperately, and saw it. In the reflection of the laptop screen, behind him, a figure, standing too close, watching him, not moving, not breathing, waiting. Daniel spun around. Nothing. The room stood empty, silent, still. But the screen, the reflection, did not agree. The figure remained, and slowly, very slowly, it leaned closer to him and smiled. Chapter 5. The Reflection That Stayed. Daniel did not move. He could not, because the thing in the reflection was still there. The laptop screen, dim and flickering, held an image that refused to obey reality. Behind him stood a man. Still, silent, watching. Daniel's breathing grew shallow, slow, controlled, not by calm, but by something far more dangerous. Denial. "No," he whispered again, weaker this time. He turned, quickly, violently. Nothing. The room stood empty, exactly as before. The bed untouched, the chair unmoved, the air still. But the feeling remained. That unbearable, suffocating certainty that he was no longer alone. Slowly, with dread creeping through his bones, Daniel turned back toward the screen. The reflection was still there. And now, it was closer. So close that Daniel could see its face clearly. It was him. Not identical, but wrong. The skin slightly paler, the eyes darker, deeper, as if they had seen something that Daniel had not yet experienced. Or perhaps, something he soon would. The reflection tilted its head. Daniel did not. A cold wave ran through his body. "That's not," he whispered. The reflection blinked. He did not. And then, very slowly, the reflection smiled. Not a human smile, not warm, not natural. A knowing smile. The kind that belongs to someone who understands the end of a story before it begins. Daniel stumbled backward. His foot caught the edge of the chair. It scraped loudly across the floor. This time, sound existed. "Who are you?" he shouted. The room did not answer, but the screen did. Words began to form again. "You stayed longer this time." Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. "This time," he repeated. The cursor blinked, then continued. "That's good." His hands trembled now, his mind racing, trying to anchor itself in logic, failing. "I've never been here before," he said firmly, desperately. The screen paused. Then slowly, as if correcting a child, "You always say that." Something inside Daniel broke, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a thread snapping in the dark. The reflection leaned closer, closer than physically possible. Its lips parted, and though the room remained silent, Daniel heard the voice clearly, not from outside, but inside his own mind. "You're remembering slower this time." Daniel shook his head violently. No, this isn't real, this isn't." The room flickered. For a single second, everything changed. The bed rotted. The desk cracked. Dust swallowed the air. Then, it returned. Perfect, untouched. Daniel collapsed to his knees. The truth was no longer distant, no longer abstract. It was here, breathing, watching, waiting. And the worst part, the part his mind refused to accept, was not that something else was in the room, but that something in the room was him. Disclaimer. This story is fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real events is purely coincidental. Chapter 6. The Man Who Knew the Ending. Daniel remained on his knees, not because he was weak, but because something inside him had begun to understand. And understanding, in this house, was far more dangerous than fear. The laptop screen flickered again. The reflection did not. The other Daniel, if it could still be called that, stood impossibly close now. So close that the boundary between reflection and reality felt thin, fragile. "Who are you?" Daniel whispered again. This time, the answer came. Not on the screen, not in the air, but directly inside his mind. "I am what remains." Daniel's breath caught. "No, that's not you." The word settled heavily. Final. Daniel shook his head, violently. "I'm right here. I'm real. I just came into this room." The reflection's expression changed, not angry, not mocking, pitying. "You think this is the first time?" The room pulsed. Light dimmed, then returned. Images flashed, not seen with the eyes, but remembered without permission. Daniel standing at the door. Daniel holding the key. Daniel opening it. Again, and again, and again. He gasped, clutching his head. No, that's not possible." "You always say that." The same words, the same tone. But now, they felt older. The reflection stepped forward, and this time Daniel did not turn, because he knew there would be nothing there. Every version of you reaches this point, the voice continued. Confusion, denial, then a pause. Acceptance. The laptop screen updated. Iteration 17. Daniel froze. 17? You lasted longer this time. Something cold crawled up his spine. What happens after? For the first time, the reflection hesitated. Then slowly, it smiled again. But this time, it wasn't cruel. It was tired. You already know. The room flickered violently. For a moment, the illusion shattered completely. The walls cracked. The bed collapsed into rot. Dust choked the air. And surrounding him, dozens of faint figures stood in silence, watching. Versions of him. Some older, some broken, some barely human. Then, everything snapped back. Perfect, clean, alive. Daniel's voice trembled. I don't remember. The reflection leaned closer and whispered, That's the only reason you're still here. Silence fell again, heavy, unforgiving. And somewhere deep within the house, something shifted. Not the structure, not the walls, but the cycle. Chapter 7. The room that was discovered. Dr. Edmund Ashford did not build the room. That truth came slowly, painfully, like something being remembered rather than learned. Daniel stood in the center of it, the room that breathed, watched, and repeated. And now, it began to show him things. The walls shifted, not physically, but perceptually. The polished wood dissolved into something older, rough stone, damp, ancient. The air grew heavier, thicker, as though it carried the weight of time long before the house itself had ever existed. And then, Daniel saw him. A man stood near the far wall, tall, thin, dressed in dark 19th century attire. Dr. Edmund Ashford. He was not a memory, not entirely. He moved, slow, careful steps, as if afraid the room might react to sudden motion. In his hands, a notebook. The same one Daniel had found. Ashford spoke, but not to Daniel. To observe is to survive, he murmured, writing as he walked. To interfere is to become part of it. Daniel tried to speak, but no sound left his mouth. He was not present. He was witnessing. The room around Ashford was different, less controlled, less stable. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. The light flickered without source, and in the corners, something moved. Ashford avoided looking at them, deliberately. I did not create this place, he continued, his voice tightening slightly. I found it. Daniel's chest tightened. Ashford stopped near what would one day become the door. But now, there was no door, only an opening. Dark. Endless. It exists beneath perception, Ashford whispered. A fracture, where time collapses inward. A faint sound echoed, not from the room, but from within the darkness. Breathing. Ashford froze. His pen slipped slightly in his hand. I have begun sealing the entrance, he said quickly, almost nervously. Containment is possible. It must be. Daniel felt something shift again. The room reacted. The darkness at the opening pulsed. Once. And for a brief, horrifying moment, Daniel saw inside it. Not space, not emptiness, but countless overlapping moments, stacked, repeating, breaking. People, voices, versions of the same events, looping endlessly. Then, it was gone. Ashford stepped back, breathing unevenly now. "It requires continuity," he whispered. "A presence, an observer. Without one." He hesitated. For the first time, fear entered his voice. "It expands." The walls trembled. Ashford turned, and for a split second, his eyes met Daniel's. Directly. As if, against all logic, he could see him. "You," Ashford said softly. Daniel's heart stopped. "You're one of them now." The room snapped violently. The vision shattered. The polished wooden walls returned. The desk, the bed, the light. But something had changed. Daniel staggered back. Because now, he understood something far worse than the room itself. This place was never meant to trap people. It was meant to contain something else. And people were just the price. Chapter 8. The first time. He remembered dying. Daniel blinked, and the room was gone. He was standing in the hallway. Morning light. Soft. Normal. For a moment, everything felt right. The door at the end of the corridor stood closed, locked, silent. Daniel exhaled slowly. Relief spread through him like warmth returning to frozen limbs. "It was a dream," he whispered. But even as the words left his mouth, something inside him recoiled. Because this feeling, this exact moment, was familiar. Not in memory, but in repetition. He walked toward the kitchen, each step careful, measured, as if the house might react if he moved too quickly. The air was calm, still, harmless. He reached the counter and froze. There, placed perfectly at the center, a porcelain cup. Steam curled gently from its surface. Fresh, warm, impossible. Daniel's hands began to tremble. "No," he whispered. The memory hit him suddenly, violently. The room, the reflection, the other him. He staggered back, clutching his head. "I've done this before." The words felt wrong, heavy, like they didn't belong to him, but had been forced into him. A sharp ringing filled his ears. And then, a voice. Not outside. Not inside. Everywhere. "Good," Daniel gasped. "You remember faster now." The world flickered. For a split second, the walls peeled away. The hallway decayed. Rot spread across the wood. Light vanished. And standing at the end of the corridor was him, watching. Then, everything snapped back. Clean. Perfect. Untouched. Daniel stumbled toward the door. No. 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 He grabbed the handle. Twisted. Locked. Of course it was. Behind it, the light began to return. Faint. Golden. Alive. Daniel backed away slowly. "I won't open it this time," he said. Silence. Then, softly, "You already did." The words echoed. Layered. Repeated. Daniel's breathing became erratic. "That doesn't make sense. If I don't open it, you're not before it anymore." The realization struck like ice through his veins. This wasn't the beginning. This was after. Always after. The room wasn't waiting for him to enter. It was waiting for him to remember that he already had. The light beneath the door grew brighter. The smell of coffee returned. Stronger. Closer. And then, the handle moved. On its own, Daniel screamed. The door creaked open slowly, and from within, he saw himself again, sitting calmly at the desk, typing, not surprised, not afraid, waiting. The other Daniel looked up, met his eyes, and spoke the same words, with quiet certainty. "This is where you stopped last time." Daniel's legs gave out beneath him, because now he understood something far worse than death. He had already lived this moment, and failed. Chapter 9. The Others Who Failed. Daniel did not remember standing up, yet suddenly he was inside the room again. The transition had no movement, no passage, no logic. One moment, the hallway. The next, the room. The other. Daniel still sat at the desk, typing, calm, unbothered. "You are learning faster," he said without looking up. Daniel's voice trembled. "How many of us are there?" The typing stopped. A pause. Then, enough to keep it stable. The air shifted, and for the first time, Daniel noticed something he hadn't before. The corners of the room were wrong. Too dark. Too deep. As if they extended further than the walls allowed. "Look closer," the other Daniel said quietly. And against his better judgment, he did. The darkness moved, not like shadow, but like something breathing inside it. Then, shapes began to form. Figures. At first, just outlines. Then, details. Faces. Daniel staggered back. They were all him. Dozens. Standing. Sitting. Collapsed. Each one different. One stared blankly at the wall, whispering to himself. Another clawed at his own arms, as if trying to tear something out from beneath his skin. One sat perfectly still, smiling at nothing. And one stood closest, older, thinner, eyes hollow. That version of Daniel stepped forward slightly. "I tried to leave," he said softly. Daniel swallowed hard. "What happened?" The older version smiled faintly. "I did." A pause. For a moment. The room flickered. Daniel saw it. The outside. Freedom. Then, everything snapped. The older version's face twisted slightly. "And then I came back." Another voice emerged from the darkness. "I tried to destroy the room." A different version stepped forward. Hands burned, skin cracked. "It didn't like that." A third voice, closer. I stopped opening the door. This one looked almost normal, almost sane. "What happened to you?" Daniel asked. The man tilted his head. "It opened anyway." Silence fell. Heavy, suffocating. Daniel turned slowly toward the one at the desk. "You've seen all of this before, haven't you?" The other Daniel finally looked at him and nodded. "I am what you become when you stop trying." Daniel's chest tightened. "No, there has to be a way out." The room pulsed. All the other versions turned, at the same time, toward him. And in perfect unison, they spoke. "That's what we said." The lights flickered violently. The room trembled. And for the first time, Daniel realized something even more terrifying than being trapped. This wasn't punishment. This wasn't random. This was a system. And every version of him was part of how it worked. Chapter 10. The Rules That Cannot Be Broken. The room had gone quiet. Not empty, but attentive. Every version of Daniel faded back into the corners, dissolving into shadow, into memory, into something less than human. All except one. The one at the desk. He sat still, fingers resting lightly on the keyboard, as if the act of typing itself was optional now, as if he no longer needed it. Daniel stood across from him, shaking, but no longer from fear alone. Now, it was understanding. You said this is a system, Daniel spoke slowly. Then explain it. The man at the desk looked up. For the first time, there was no smile, only exhaustion. It's not a room, he said quietly. It's a mechanism. Daniel swallowed. For what? A pause. To keep something contained. The air grew heavier. Daniel felt it again. That presence beneath everything. Not in the walls, not in the shadows, but behind time itself. What is it? Daniel asked. The other version shook his head slightly. You don't survive long enough to understand that part. Anger flared. I'm not like the others. A faint smile returned. Not mocking, not cruel. Just familiar. They all said that. Silence. Daniel clenched his fists. Then tell me the rules. The man at the desk leaned back slowly. The chair creaked, not from age, but from repetition. There are 3, he said. The room dimmed slightly, as if listening. Rule 1. Time does not move forward here. Daniel frowned. It folds, the man continued. Loops, breaks, repairs itself. That's not possible. It doesn't need to be possible, he interrupted calmly. It only needs to be true. The walls flickered faintly, as if agreeing. Rule 2. You cannot leave. Daniel's breath hitched. You can step outside, the man clarified. You can see the world again. A pause. But you will always return, Daniel remembered the vision. The windows, the versions of himself watching. No, he whispered. Yes. Rule 3. The room grew colder. The man at the desk leaned forward, and for the first time, his voice lowered. You will replace me. Daniel froze. What? The man gestured toward the laptop. I was you. A long silence followed. And you will be me. Daniel shook his head violently. No, I won't stay here. I'll destroy this place. I'll burn it. The room pulsed, hard. The walls cracked for a split second, revealing something beneath. Darkness, endless, watching. The man at the desk spoke again. Try. The word echoed, layered, repeated. Daniel's voice trembled. What happens if I don't? The man tilted his head, and this time, his expression changed. Not tired, not calm, terrified. Then it stops working. The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel whispered. And if it stops? The man at the desk looked toward the walls, toward the unseen thing beneath them. And for the first time, he hesitated, then answered, It comes through. The room went completely still, and somewhere, deep beneath the illusion, something moved, slow, ancient, awake. Chapter 11. The Choice That Was Already Made. Daniel stood in the center of the room, breathing, thinking, fighting. You're lying, he said. But the words felt weak, even to him. The man at the desk didn't react, didn't argue. He simply watched. That thing, whatever this is, it can't be contained forever, Daniel continued, forcing strength into his voice. There has to be a way to end it. A long silence followed. Then, quietly, the man replied, There is. Daniel froze. Hope. Sharp. Dangerous. How? He demanded. The man leaned forward slightly. You stop the cycle. The room reacted instantly. The light flickered. The walls trembled. Something beneath the floor shifted. Slow. Heavy. Daniel felt it. Not with his body, but deeper, Then why hasn't anyone done it? He asked. The man smiled faintly. They tried. The shadows stirred. For a moment, Daniel saw them again. The others. One screaming, one burning, one clawing at invisible walls. They broke the loop, the man continued softly. A pause, and something broke with it. Daniel's voice dropped. What came out? The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the walls, as if listening, as if making sure it was still, contained. Then finally, he spoke. Not something, he said. A pause. Everything. The word settled like weight. Daniel stepped back slightly. No, that doesn't make sense. You think in human terms, the man interrupted. Beginning, end, cause, effect. He shook his head slowly. This place doesn't follow those rules. The room pulsed again, stronger. Daniel felt pressure build in his skull. Then I won't play along, he said suddenly. I won't sit at that desk. I won't become you. For the first time, the man's expression sharpened. That's exactly what I said. Silence. Daniel's hands clenched. I'm ending. This! He turned, grabbing the chair beside him. With a sudden, desperate force, he hurled it toward the wall. The impact echoed, but not like sound, like distortion. The wall cracked. And behind it, for a single horrifying moment, Daniel saw it. Not a creature, not a form, but an endless shifting mass of moments, faces, voices, time collapsing into itself, trying to push through. The room screamed, not audibly, but violently. The light shattered, darkness surged. The man at the desk stood up instantly. Stop! Too late. The crack widened. Something pressed against it. Not physical, but real enough. Daniel fell backward, terror finally overwhelming him. What is that? He screamed. The man's voice broke. For the first time. That's what we're holding back. The room trembled violently, the shadows twisted, and from the crack, a sound emerged. Not language, not voice, but something that felt like every moment happening at once. Daniel covered his ears. I can fix it. I can... The man grabbed him. Hard. You already broke it before, he shouted. And every time, this happens. Daniel's mind fractured. Before? The man stared into his eyes. Desperate now. Yes. A pause. You always choose this. The crack pulsed again. Wider. Closer. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. The light returned. The walls healed. The room stabilized. Silence. Heavy. Final. Daniel lay on the floor, shaking, breathing hard. The man released him slowly. You see now, he whispered. Daniel didn't answer. Because now, for the first time, he truly understood. This wasn't a trap. This was a responsibility, and the choice was never between staying or leaving. It was between becoming the keeper or becoming the reason everything ends. Chapter 12. The first breach. Daniel did not remember falling. Yet suddenly, he was no longer in the room. The warmth was gone, the light gone, the illusion gone. Cold stone pressed beneath his feet. Wet, uneven, ancient. He looked around. Ashford House did not exist here. There were no polished floors, no walls as he knew them, only a vast underground chamber, rough, unfinished, as if carved not by tools, but by discovery. And at its centre, a man, Dr. Edmund Ashford, younger now, less controlled, less certain. He stood before a wide, open void in the earth, not a hole, Not a tunnel, but a tear. Reality itself seemed thinner there, unstable, like glass about to crack. Ashford was speaking, his voice trembling despite his effort to sound composed. "It is not madness," he muttered, writing rapidly in his journal. "It is structure, a pattern, hidden beneath perception." Daniel tried to move, tried to speak. But again, he was only a witness. Ashford stepped closer to the tear. From within it came a sound, layered, endless. Not one voice, but many, overlapping, repeating. Daniel felt it instantly, that same pressure, that same presence, but stronger, raw, uncontained. Ashford hesitated. For the first time, fear overtook curiosity. "I should seal it," he whispered. But he didn't move, because something inside the tear moved first, not outward, but toward him, a shift, a pull. And suddenly, Ashford gasped. His body stiffened. His pen dropped. Daniel saw it then, not clearly, never clearly, but enough. Something had reached through, not physically, but conceptually. It touched Ashford's mind, and in that moment, Ashford saw everything, time, all at once, every moment stacked, every possibility unfolding, every version of himself, existing simultaneously. He screamed, not from pain, but for ourselves. Hey, too much understanding. Then, silence. Ashford collapsed to his knees, breathing hard, shaking, and slowly, very slowly, he smiled. Not with relief, not with joy, but with realization. "I see it now," he whispered. Daniel felt dread crawl through him, because that smile was the same one, the one from the reflection, the one from the desk, the one that comes after understanding breaks something inside you. Ashford stood. "I cannot close it," he said quietly. "It is already open." A pause. "But I can contain it." The chamber trembled slightly. Ashford turned, and for the second time, his eyes met Daniel's, directly. "You're part of it now," he said calmly. Daniel's heart pounded. "No, this already happened. You can't see me." Ashford stepped closer. "You think this is the past?" he asked softly. Daniel froze. The chamber pulsed. The tear widened slightly, as if reacting. "There is no past here," Ashford continued. "No future." A faint smile returned. "Only participation." Daniel's breath stopped. Ashford raised his hand, not toward Daniel, but toward the tear. "And you," he whispered, "are already inside it." The world fractured. The chamber shattered into light. The room returned. The desk, the bed, the walls, and Daniel, back where he had always been. But now, he understood the worst truth of all. This was never Ashford's mistake. It was his continuation. Chapter 13. The One Who Never Left. Daniel stood frozen. The room had returned to its perfect state, clean, warm, alive. But something fundamental had changed. He was no longer afraid of the room. He was afraid of who else was in it. "You said this was a continuation," Daniel whispered slowly. The man at the desk didn't respond immediately. He was watching something. Not Daniel, not the screen, the walls, as if listening. "As I said," the man finally replied, voice low. "You understand faster now." Daniel stepped closer. His fear had shifted. It was no longer chaotic. It was focused. "Where is Ashford?" he asked. Silence. The question lingered in the air. Heavy, unwelcome. Then, the man smiled. Not tired, not cruel, recognizing. Why do you think you keep seeing him? He asked quietly. Daniel's stomach tightened. That was the past, he said quickly. I saw it. You showed me. He opened the breach. He started this. The man shook his head slowly. No. The word landed with finality. That wasn't the past, he continued. That was him remembering. Daniel froze. What? The room pulsed faintly. The man stood up. And for the first time, he stepped away from the desk. You think Ashford existed before this? He said calmly. Daniel didn't answer, because something inside him was already breaking. The man walked slowly toward him. Tell me, Daniel, he said softly, when you saw him. A pause. Did he look like a man discovering something? Daniel's breath became shallow, or like someone who had already seen too much. The memory flashed. Ashford's face, that smile, that understanding. Daniel staggered back slightly. No. No, that doesn't mean... It means, the man interrupted gently, he never left. Silence. The room felt smaller. Closer. Daniel shook his head. That's not possible. He built this house. He started the cycle. And what if, the man said quietly, that was just another loop? The words struck deeper than anything before. What if Ashford, he continued, was just another version of you? The world tilted. Daniel's mind rejected it instantly. No, that's insane. He lived in the 1800s. Time doesn't move here, the man reminded him. A pause. It folds. The walls flickered. For a split second, Daniel saw it. Ashford, standing in the room. Not in the past. Here, watching. Then, gone. Daniel's voice broke. I saw him. The man nodded. You will keep seeing him. Why? A faint, almost sad smile. Because one day, he said, you will be him. The room went silent. Not empty. Expectant. Daniel felt something collapse inside his thoughts. No. But the word carried no weight, because now everything aligned. The journal, the writing, the understanding, the experiment. It wasn't a beginning. It was a stage. A version. A role. The man stepped closer. Some versions of you become the observer, he said quietly. Some become the keeper. A pause. And some, he tilted his head slightly, become the one who starts it all over again. Daniel's heart pounded violently. You're saying The man raised a hand gently. Not yet. Silence. Then, he gestured toward the desk. The laptop flickered. A new line appeared. Iteration 18. Preparing transition. Daniel stared at it. What happens now? The man looked at him one last time. And this time, there was no smile. Only certainty. You take your place. The room pulsed. And somewhere deep beneath everything, something shifted again. Waiting.
Did you know, in the 19th century, during the Victorian era, scientists and doctors were obsessed with understanding life, death, and the human mind. Some experiments went far beyond ethics. One real example comes from early electrical experiments on dead bodies. In 1818, Scottish scientist Andrew Ure applied electricity to the corpse of an executed criminal, and witnesses claimed the body moved, twitched, and even appeared to come back to life. People in the room reportedly panicked, believing they had just witnessed resurrection. At the same time, Victorian society believed isolation could cure disease and even mental instability. This led to the creation of isolation wards and hospitals, where people were kept completely separated, sometimes for long periods, because doctors thought bad air caused illness. But here's the disturbing part. Many patients began showing signs of psychological breakdown, hallucinations, paranoia, and loss of time perception. This means your story idea isn't just fiction. The concept of a locked room, isolation, and losing sense of time is actually rooted in real Victorian-era practices, where science, fear, and curiosity often crossed dangerous lines.
Chapter 14. The Moment Before Becoming. The room had grown quieter than ever before. Not peaceful, not empty, but final. Daniel stood facing the desk. The laptop screen glowed faintly, its light no longer warm, but clinical, observing, recording. Iteration 18, preparing transition. The words did not flicker this time. They remained, stable, certain. Daniel S. hands hung at his sides, still, heavy. For the first time since entering Ashford House, he was no longer reacting. He was thinking. "You said I have a choice," he spoke slowly. The man, his reflection, his future, his replacement, stood behind him, silent. "You said I could stop the cycle." A pause. "Or continue it." The air thickened. The man stepped closer. "Yes." Daniel nodded faintly. "And if I refuse both?" Silence. Not hesitation, but something deeper. Then, quietly, "That's when it breaks." The words echoed unnaturally. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Behind his eyelids, he saw it again. The crack, the thing beneath, the endless collision of time, waiting, always waiting. "I saw what happens," Daniel whispered. The man didn't respond, because he didn't need to. Daniel opened his eyes. "You're afraid of it too." This time, the man did react. A subtle shift, a tightening. "Yes," he admitted. The honesty was unexpected. "You've seen it more than I have," Daniel continued. "You know what happens if this stops working." The man's voice lowered. "I've seen enough." Daniel took a slow breath. "And yet, you stayed." A long silence followed. Then, "I didn't stay," the man said quietly. A pause. "I became necessary." The words settled like stone. Daniel looked at the desk, the chair, the screen, the place where the cycle anchored itself. "This is how it survives," Daniel said softly. The man nodded. "Yes." "Through us?" Another nod. Daniel stepped closer to the desk. Every step felt heavier, not physically, but existentially, as if he were stepping deeper into something that would not let him step back. "You're not just observing," Daniel said. His voice was calmer now, clearer. "You're holding it together." The man's expression didn't change, because there was nothing left to hide. "Yes." Daniel placed a hand on the back of the chair. The wood was warm, not from temperature, but from use, repeated, endless. "And if I sit there?" The sentence trailed off, but the answer came anyway. "You won't leave," the man said. A pause. "You won't forget." Another pause. "And you won't be entirely human anymore." The room dimmed slightly. Daniel let out a quiet breath. "And if I don't?" The walls trembled faintly. A distant pressure built, deep beneath everything. The man stepped closer, one final time, and whispered, "Then you'll finally see what's been trying to get in." The lights flickered violently. For a brief moment, the illusion shattered again. The room rotted, collapsed, decayed. And behind it, it waited. Not patient, not angry, but inevitable. Everything at once. Daniel staggered slightly, but didn't fall. Because now, he understood the truth completely. This was never about escape. This was about balance. And he, like all the others, had been brought here for a single purpose: to decide whether the world outside remained untouched, or finally met what had always been waiting beneath it. Daniel looked at the chair. Then slowly, he reached for it. Chapter 15. The Keeper of the Door. Daniel's fingers tightened around the chair. For a moment, just a moment, time hesitated. Not the room, not the house. Him. Every version of himself seemed to gather in that single instant. The ones who ran, the ones who fought, the ones who broke. All of them, watching, waiting to see what this version would choose. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I understand now," he said. The man behind him said nothing, because there was nothing left to explain. Daniel pulled the chair back. The sound echoed unnaturally, not through space, but through repetition, as if that same movement had been made, again, and again, and again. He sat down. The moment he did, the room changed, not violently, not suddenly, but completely. The warmth stabilized, the light softened, the walls locked into place. The house exhaled, deep, relieved. The pressure beneath everything paused. Daniel stared at the laptop screen. The words shifted. Iteration 18, active. His reflection appeared in the dark glass. But now, it matched him perfectly. No delay, no distortion, no difference. Daniel placed his hands on the keyboard. He didn't remember learning what to type, yet his fingers began to move. Slow, certain. Subject stabilized. The words appeared. Daniel watched them form, not as something he chose, but something he understood. Behind him, the other man stepped back, fading, not disappearing, but becoming less necessary. "Now you see," his voice echoed faintly. Daniel did not turn, because he already knew there would be no one there. The room had adjusted, the system had corrected itself, and Daniel was now the center of it. Time flowed differently now. He could feel it, not as seconds, not as hours, but as layers. Moments overlapping, repeating, stacking. He could sense the hallway, the house, the world outside, and beneath all of it, that presence, waiting, always waiting, but no longer pushing, no longer breaking through, because now it was contained by him. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something inside him had. The part that resisted, the part that feared, the part that hoped to leave, gone, replaced by something quieter, colder, endless. The screen flickered again. A new line appeared. "Prepare for next arrival." Daniel's fingers paused briefly, then continued typing. Because now, he understood what came next. And more importantly, why it had to happen. Chapter 16. The first time was the last. The house was quiet again, perfectly quiet. Ashford House stood as it always had, still, patient, unchanged. At the end of the hallway, the door remained closed, locked, and beneath it, a thin line of golden light breathed softly. Inside the room, Daniel Harper sat at the desk, still, focused, unmoving. The laptop glowed before him, its light steady, its presence constant. His fingers moved slowly across the keyboard. "System stable." The words appeared. He paused. Not because he was unsure, but because something distant brushed against his awareness. A sensation, faint, familiar, the feeling of waking up, elsewhere, another version, another moment, another him. Daniel did not react, because now he understood what that feeling meant. A new arrival. The front door of Ashford House opened. A man stepped inside. He carried a suitcase, modern, ordinary. He looked around with quiet curiosity. "Strange place," he muttered. His voice echoed softly through the halls. He walked further in, exploring, observing, unaware, always unaware. Inside the room, Daniel continued typing. Subject entering initial phase. The man moved through the house slowly, admiring the architecture, the silence, the stillness. He reached the hallway, paused, because something felt off. He couldn't explain it. No one ever could. Daniel's fingers stopped. For a moment, just a moment, something old stirred inside him. A memory. Not clear, not whole, but enough to form a single thought. I was him. The man at the end of the hallway looked toward the final door, frowning slightly. "Probably storage," he murmured. Inside the room, Daniel's reflection flickered. For a split second, it didn't match him. It looked younger, confused, human. Then it stabilized. Gone. Daniel resumed typing. Curiosity phase initiated. The man stepped closer to the door. The air shifted. The house listened. And then, at exactly 2:17 a.m., he woke. The smell of fresh coffee filled the hallway. Inside the room, Daniel did not look up. Because he already knew exactly what would happen next, exactly what would be said, exactly how it would end and begin. From the other side of the door, a voice emerged, soft, calm, certain. "You're early." The man froze, just as Daniel once had, just as all of them had. And in that moment, the final truth revealed itself. Not to the man outside, but to Daniel. This was not a cycle. Not truly, because cycles repeat. This was something far worse. It had already happened. It was already happening. It would never stop happening. And somewhere, beyond the walls, beyond time, something vast, something patient, shifted slightly. Still waiting. Inside the room, Daniel Harper, or what remained of him, smiled faintly and continued typing.